Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining this CDSB webinar on the current state and future of TCFD, or the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, as part of our Climate Week New York 2020 webinar series. My name is Mardi McBrien, and I'm the Managing Director at the Climate Disclosure Standards Board. CDSB, for those of you not familiar with us, we were set up in 2007 by a group of business and environmental organizations to secure the integration of climate and environmental information into mainstream corporate reports with the same rigorous financial information, amongst many other things we get up to. This is an extremely interesting topic we are talking about today, and I know many of you will have lots and lots of questions, so I'll be taking them as we go along and try and weave them in with the speakers, so don't wait to the end, but there will be a dedicated Q&A time at the end as well. So on whatever platform you're listening to us on today, please pop them in the chat function and we'll make sure they get to the speakers. So Climate Week New York and the General Assembly Week is already proving to be very eventful. We always have lots of announcements, and I was delighted to read earlier today that China is committing to net zero by 2060. And Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England and custodian of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure Recommendations, has promised this week that next year's climate change conference would be a turning point for mandatory reporting. So without further ado, I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to hand across to Mara Childress, who is the Director of Global Public Policy at Bloomberg LP. And she's also one of the amazing team that has been working so hard behind the scenes at the TCFD Secretariat to make all of this tremendous work and effort happen over the last 3 or 4 years, Mara. But it has been truly amazing. So I'm going to hand it over to you for your presentation. And thank you on behalf of all of us for everything that you've done.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Hope you can hear me. Thank you so much to the CDSB team for arranging this panel and for having me. And thank you to everyone who's joined us today. It's great to have so many attendees on this line. I know it's a really busy week for everyone, so I'll get right to what I've been asked to talk about. What is next for TCFD? You all have asked the right question actually at exactly the right time, because we've been working on several things over the past year, and we're actually getting close enough to releasing them to be able to talk about them. I think this is probably the first time I have been able to talk about it publicly. So everyone on the line here gets a special preview of what's coming in the next couple of months. You can go to the next slide. I think that anyone who's been involved with climate and disclosure has felt a huge amount of momentum behind TCFD in the past year. I'm not going to read off all the little bullets on our milestones document, but it was only 3 years ago that we released our recommendations, and at that time we had the support of just over 100 CEOs. As of this month, we've actually reached nearly 1,500 TCFD supporting organizations. And if there's anyone here who hasn't signed up yet, you're welcome to reach out to us. You could be lucky number 1,500. But nearly 675 of those organizations became TCFD supporters since we issued our last status report in 2019. I think that's about an 80% increase in a year, so huge momentum. The momentum also includes quite a bit of movement in the public sector through several recent reports or consultations, announcements from government agencies in countries like New Zealand, which the CDSB team helped quite a bit with, Brazil, Canada, the UK, Singapore, Mexico, the EU, and others. We definitely expect that this trend will continue as more organizations recognize the value of climate-related financial disclosure. But at the end of the day, for us, our goal really is TCFD implementation. It's pushing for more and better climate-related information, and everything that we do is toward that goal. So in light of that, our status report for 2020 will be released in late October or early November, depending on a few factors. And I'll give you a preview of what it will cover. We'll also release a couple of other documents at that time that are intended to assist with implementation as well. But this year's report will be similar to our previous reports. It will have an overview of current disclosure practices and progress based on an artificial intelligence disclosure review. It also includes results of recent PRI reporting from asset owners and asset managers, which is really interesting. The report will include a new section on which elements of the TCFD recommendations a group of expert users rated most useful for their financial decisions. And spoiler alert, they actually rated all of the elements of the TCFD recommendations as useful. So it's really about which are most useful. There's a section on addressing certain implementation challenges and one on case studies from financial institutions on their TCFD implementation experiences. And there will also be a section on some major initiatives that have helped to drive implementation over the past few years. Next slide. The section on implementation challenges specifically refers back to last year's report, where we did a survey to better understand what those challenges were. They're shown on this slide, although it's small text, sorry. But we dove further into those issues this year through some interviews and some further analysis, and we provide some color on how to help address those issues in this year's report. They also inform two new areas of TCFD guidance on scenario analysis and risk management that I'll talk about in a moment. You can go to the next slide. This one I'll just go through quickly, but it provides a little bit more color on the implementation case studies from 3 of our task force members, Moody's, CPPIB, and Generation Investment Management, on their implementation experiences. But I think those are really helpful. We've had case studies in our past reports on implementation as well, if you haven't seen those. And of course, a little bit more on the key related initiatives on the right side of the slide. Go to the next. So in addition to our status report, we've been working on certain areas where further assistance seemed needed for companies' TCFD implementations. This may be no surprise to anyone, but we are always receiving questions on our recommended disclosure strategy C on climate-related resilience and climate-related scenario analysis. We know that it can seem really daunting for companies that have never undertaken scenario analysis before or thought about climate in that way. So we wanted to provide a really practical, process-oriented guidance for companies to begin using scenario analysis. And of course, disclosing the second part on their strategic resilience to different climate-related futures. This guidance, it will be mostly targeted at non-financial companies. But similarly, we will issue guidance on the integration of climate-related risks into existing risk management processes and on disclosure of those processes. Special thanks to Lois and her team at WBCSD for their assistance with this guidance. I think, again, it will be really helpful, and we really appreciate all of the time that they have spent on it. And finally, there has been significant progress around metrics in the 3 years since we issued our recommendations in 2017. So we wanted to explore this progress further and gain a little bit more insight actually from the market on whether updated or further guidance is needed around those metrics. So we'll issue a consultation on forward-looking metrics for the financial sector, including implied temperature rise, climate value at risk, and other forward-looking metrics. We're also considering further consultation on metrics and targets related to non-financial companies and Scope 3 emissions. And the response period for any TCFD consultations will be 90 days, so plenty of time. And we really absolutely welcome and invite feedback from all types of organizations to help us figure out what we need to do next on those points. So you'll hear more about the consultation around the time it's issued in, again, late October, early November. So stay tuned, everyone. Next slide. I guess speaking of future work, we are already looking forward to our 2021 status report. That'll be issued in 2021. It's still a little early to make any promises about what will be in it, but I anticipate it will include another kind of review of the state of climate-related financial disclosure. We want to explore a little bit more around financial impact, both on disclosure of financial impact related to climate, and also on how those types of disclosures are used within the financial community. Also, getting a picture of reporting from asset managers and asset owners has always been a bit of a challenge because the reporting that they provide to their clients and beneficiaries is not always public. And of course, first priority is for clients and beneficiaries to get the information that they need, but it's hard for us to review that if it's not available. So we would like to explore more on their disclosure practices in the upcoming year. And of course, any other kind of helpful content for the report will be top priority for us. Beyond the report, of course, we'll use the responses to the consultation that we receive to determine kind of whether any next steps or further guidance is needed around metrics or any other areas. And finally, we will continue to do just as much as we can and to work with organizations to encourage TCFD implementation and continue driving the momentum around TCFD. That's it for me. I'm really looking forward to hearing more on the important TCFD implementation work from Lois and Gemma. Thank you.
Thanks, Mara. That was really fantastic. And I'm really interested in the whole next steps for 2021. Because Mark did state, Mark Carney, in his sort of his speech that he made when moving to climate reporting, that climate information should not be tucked away in a corporate sustainability report and should be as relevant as a company's interest rate risks. A ubiquitous part of financial disclosures, and that's one area we really see at CDSB that people really struggle with. It's actually the financial impacts of climate change, whether they're positive and negative, and how to report that. And, you know, it doesn't matter who does the study. It could be us. It could be any organization out there. I think that's where people are really still falling short, from my perspective anyway, at what we're seeing at CDSB on TCFD. Just a quick question we have coming through. How do we measure quality of TCFD disclosures?
That is a great question. Of course, you know, it really can vary by organization around what issues within the TCFD framework are most important to them. Of course, we value comprehensiveness. So 2 of our recommendations are subject to materiality, but we still encourage as much disclosure as we can. That's what we're in business for. And then, of course, relevance to the organization itself. We see a lot of the time in reporting that companies will talk generally about things that could happen related to climate, but they don't relate it back to the actual company and the impacts that it could have on the company. So I think as long as the relevant information is provided around how climate could impact them or how they're managing climate, all of the different areas of the recommendations, that's always a good start. And then we also always welcome feedback actually from the financial community, because they're the ones who are using this information and need to tell us what is good quality and what they value in disclosures.
And we will get some of that through the next status report, won't we, in just a few weeks now. So hold tight, everyone. It's coming. And thank you again, Mara. That was really helpful. And thank you for giving us a few little exclusives for our webinar today. Now I'm going to hand over to Lois Guthrie, who was in fact the founding director of CDSB, but she now has a very important role as Director of Redefining Value at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And Lois has been working very hard with Mara and the TCFD team to really help shift the needle and develop some of that common and best practice in the market to help move us forward faster. So over to you, Lois.
Thank you, Mardi. Just checking you can hear me okay? I guess so. Just want, if we go to the next slide, please. Hello to everybody, by the way. I just want to briefly today tell you about the work we've been doing at WBCSD to facilitate TCFD preparer forums. So I'll tell you what they are and who was involved, give you some insights from the forums, what common themes emerged, and point to some useful resources that I know Gemma will cover later as well. So on the next slide, you can see that the preparer forums were set up at the request of the TCFD to see how companies were going to implement the recommendations after they were introduced in 2017. So these are sector-based TCFD preparer forums, and we focus on the non-financial sectors that the TCFD had identified as being those that would likely to be most affected by transition and physical risk. So they were energy, transportation, materials and building, and food, agriculture and forest products. So we focused on those sectors or subsectors of them. And the forum's purpose was to assess the current state of disclosure against TCFD recommendations, what was effective, what the common challenges were, how the users were interacting with disclosures, that is the investors, and to outline what the institutions concerned thought could be done to develop disclosure over time. So on the next few slides, I'm just going to show you who was involved. So we had between 4 and 6 members on each forum. There we have the Oil and Gas Forum, Shell, Total, Eni and Equinor. Electric utilities, you can see the names and logos there. Chemicals, we had 5 members. And on the next slide, you can see food, agriculture and forest products are 6 members there, and the 6 members of the construction and building materials forum. Now, the thing to say about these organizations is they're all TCFD supporters. So Mara referenced that earlier. They've signed up to support the TCFD. They're all really big, well-resourced companies, you know, full of smart, caring people. But even they, you know, found it difficult, you know, to think about responding to the TCFD. Although, in my opinion, they do it very well. But the outputs from these groups, they're not purporting to have all the answers. And there's certainly plenty of information in the reports that we've produced about where these companies see challenges. So if we go to the next slide, I'll just show you the outputs from these preparer forums, our reports for each of them, and they're available on the WBCSD website. So I very much encourage you to go and look at those reports, which really show you how these companies are approaching TCFD recommendations. So on the next slide, just to give you a little bit of an insight into the highlights from these reports, although it's the last bullet point, the most important thing I would say about them is that they are jam-packed with examples. I think there's an average of about 40 examples in each of the reports that show how companies are responding to the TCFD recommendations now. So the reports cover a variety of things, including the way in which companies are integrating climate risk and opportunity into their existing risk management and governance processes. As Mara said, it's a bit of a thorny issue, but they show you how they're doing it at the moment. They show you how companies interpret business resilience, how they're measuring it, how they respond to it, how they disclose on it. There are plenty of examples as well of the way in which companies are currently conducting scenario analyses. I'll show you some in a moment. Metrics, of course, always a difficult issue, but each preparer forum has taken the TCFD's list of illustrative metrics and has elaborated it to show what's particularly relevant to each of these sectors. And of course, we, from our limited interviews conducted between the preparer forum members and users, we give some insights into what the users particularly want from TCFD disclosures. So I just run you through quickly. I've given myself 13 minutes to do this. I've still got 8 left. I'll just run you through quickly some of what we see in these reports. And I've chosen these examples really at random, just to show you the types of things that you can see. I'm sorry that some of the text is not very clear, but in our oil and gas forum, there are certainly plenty of examples about interpreting what is meant by climate-related financial disclosure. So you can see the financial disclosures that these companies make about the extent to which, for example, they have free and uncommitted capital, which would support them to be resilient in the if there are climate shocks, how they use their capital discipline to invest in their strategy that addresses climate change. There are lots of those types of examples, and you can see that the little pink example, top left, is an example of Equinor's sensitivity analysis, which they undertook in 2019. And it shows changes in the net present value of Equinor's portfolio if they replace their own assumptions with IEA scenario assumptions. So it's a real life example of how they deal with scenario analysis. On the top right, you see Total's example setting out their 2035 ambitions and how they compare to IEA 2-degree scenarios. And at the bottom, with the yellow branding, that is from our friends in Italy, the oil company Eni, and it shows on one of the lines, the penultimate line, the effect on the fair value of their assets of their stress test against IEA scenarios. So that's the few examples from the Oil and Gas Forum. Next, if we have a look at the Electric Utilities Forum, now what's very useful, very interesting about the Electric Utilities Group is that they said, we want to be, and we believe we are, architects of the low carbon transition. And therefore, the biggest risk for us is that the transition doesn't take place, because all our strategy and planning and investment is really dedicated to that. So I just wanted to show, we can't go into these examples in detail. I really just want to whet your interest, that you can see the timeframes over which the electric utilities industries are planning to execute their low carbon strategies, how they're investing to achieve that, what they think will be achieved, and how their low carbon activities are relative to other fossil fuel generating activities. Then if we move to the next one, the Chemicals Forum. Now chemicals, of course, that industry, one thing they made very plain to us, that they are embedded in a very long, complex value chains. And therefore, what they produce contributes to the low carbon activities of others, as well as to their own strategies. So the extract I've picked from the Chemical Forum report shows you the types of solutions that our members are putting in place that really focus on things like energy efficiency, reduction in water use, more use of renewable energy. But a lot of the examples in the Chemical Forum report, as I say, relate to how whole value chain carbon management can be helped. On the next slide, we have examples from construction and building materials. Now, this was one of the later forum reports that we undertook, and by that time themes were emerging, and one of those themes was that these industries can do a lot within their own companies, but their real part of the success of their strategies depends upon the way in which they interact with others, and how solutions have to be implemented and designed across value chains. But here you see, again, very much solution focused. On the left-hand side, an example of a solution that ArcelorMittal is working on to help with the next generation of high-performance buildings. In the middle, you see an example of how CRH is using alternative materials to reduce their carbon footprint. And on the right, an example from Lend-Lease. I just wanted to highlight that they show the shadow carbon price they're using for making their investment decisions. Again, just a quick trot through these to pique your interest. And finally, we worked with the food, agriculture and forest products sector. And this is very interesting because they have really tangible products that affect all of us. And there's quite a lot of sort of the consumer interest and the way in which that informs strategy in this particular group. So on the top left-hand side, you'll see an example from Stora Enso, the forestry company in Finland, and they're able to show not only the sorts of new materials that replace fossil-based materials that they're working with, but also how that translates into market size and growth and future earnings potential. On the bottom left-hand corner, you see an example from Mardi about their strategy to replace plastic with paper wherever possible. And on the right-hand side, I encourage you to look at this in the Food, Agriculture and Forest Products report, because as Mara said, the whole concept of testing business resilience is really tricky for a lot of companies. But this particular group came up with their own model of what they interpreted food, agriculture and forest product resilience to mean, and they sort of captured it in this diagram, which I encourage you to study in more detail. So on my pre-penultimate slide, just to take you through a few of the common themes that we see, that the companies, I think the TCFD has prompted these companies to have a climate strategy, and that part of the success depends on the innovations happening within these companies and the way in which those innovations are tested and funded. These companies are really tackling the technical side of TCFD implementation. They're addressing what is meant by climate-related financial disclosure. They're showing what they understand to be resilience and how they test it. They're working on how to make better disclosures about medium-term outlooks, which is a bit underlooked by as far as investors are concerned. Again, we know they're working on metrics. They're pondering the practical side of disclosure. How much should we report and where should we put it? So to make it very understandable. They're thinking about how TCFD activity interrelates with complementary activities, such as the way in which sustainable activity is defined in the EU taxonomy. They want more investor dialogue to understand that preparer-user dynamic. And of course, the signals that come from policymakers are really important in determining how these climate strategies shake out. Penultimate slide is just to point you to the fact that, I know Gemma will cover this too, the risk management side, for example, and the integration of climate into risk management can't really be separated from existing risk management processes. And here I would point you to the work that WBCSD has done with COSO on how to integrate sustainability issues into your ERM processes. Please have a look at that. That's related to TCFD. And very finally, when the COVID outbreak took place, I did loads and loads of reading, and everywhere I looked, I came up with the same two words kept occurring over and over again, and they were collaborate and collapse. And then what these forums showed us is the power of collaboration that gave these companies the confidence to put these reports out, and I hope are of great help to all of you who perhaps are contemplating or trying to develop your TCFD disclosure practice. So I wish you happy collaborations.
Thank you, Lois. Collaboration, as you know, and as you instilled through us when you were at CDSB, is a very important part of moving this agenda forward. So just quickly, Lois, I have a question which I think you'll be able to answer. Will there be an audit of TCFD elements on companies by the TCFD, or would ESG third party be able to assure and confirm this? I think assurance is probably a theme that you're hearing. We're starting to hear it a bit more. You're probably hearing it too, Mara. Any positions on that?
The short answer is I really, really don't know. But a technical answer, which I've heard from others, is that in order to be able to conduct any assurance activity, you have to have suitable criteria for conducting the assurance activity. And at the moment, I don't know whether the TCFD recommendations and emerging practice represent suitable criteria. So I would invite any professional accountants to reflect on that subject and sort of perhaps advise us whether the TCFD recommendations do represent suitable criteria, and if not, what could be done to make them suitable for assurance activity.
Thank you, Lois. And we got an exclusive from Mara about what's next. Are you going to give us an exclusive about what you're working on next before I hand over to the next speaker?
There's too many things to mention, Mardi, but some of the themes that we've mentioned on metrics and scenarios are really going to be ongoing in our work. And of course, the issue of comparability comes up again and again. So I suspect that there'll be more demand for an infrastructure that will give us that comparability, but whether we're involved or not, we'll see.
Great, that's fantastic. And there's been quite a few questions. Will the slides be available, links to the reports? This is being recorded. It will be available immediately on our website. We'll link to all of the reports that are have been mentioned today, all the websites that have been mentioned. So don't worry too much about that. It'll all be immediately available after this recording. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our last speaker today, Nigel Topping. Nigel Topping, well, I guess I first came across Nigel about 10 years ago when I joined CDSB. Nigel was their executive director at CDP, leading the charge on everything from supply chain and cities and scaling up corporate disclosure, almost like doubling every year. The pace was amazing. And Nigel most recently has been a CEO and really given a huge oomph and drive to We Min Business, which has again done some absolutely amazing work. Now, Nigel has the fabulous role of high-level expert, high-level envoy. What do you call it?
Come on, Mardi, get it right. High-level climate action champion.
I was going to say something much more royal than that. Nigel is in charge of securing the sort of the corporate, the non-state actors, the city's engagement and support and commitment and buy-in and ambition leading up to COP26 in Glasgow next year. We're really pleased to have Nigel on the line to tell us a bit about what that road to COP26 looked like, and maybe a bit about the role that corporate reporting can play in that. Thanks, Nigel.
Thanks, Mardi, and it's always lovely to follow the wonderful Lois. And really great to hear the real depths. I mean, I haven't done a deep dive into TCFD for a while, Lois. It's good to hear the real depths of that work and those. I think your point of collaborate or collapse seems to be so true at pretty much every level today. Whether we talk about the recovery from COVID or tackling climate change or tackling that ecological crisis that's happening at the same time. So I thought I'd just say a couple of things about the COP itself and really what collaboration is needed to deliver a successful COP, and then I'll say a little bit about the green recovery because I think that's part of the journey to COP, given that we're in the midst of a health and economic crisis, and the shape of the recovery will be determined in the 14 months between now and Glasgow. And there's a few thoughts about TCFD and disclosure and the role of that and the road to COP. So I think the first thing to say about the COP, it's a little bit like I mean, in all of these three, there's a sort of macro and a micro. There's a sort of like as Mark Carney pointed out, there's a macro challenge to financial stability if we don't tackle climate change. But then at the level of a firm, there's a risk as well. So the trigger for TCFD was the macro risk, but the tool is about identifying the micro risk so that we can take those decisions. So the COP, I first want to say what the COP isn't. It's still misreported by some people as the world's governments coming together to renegotiate a treaty on climate change. Now, I hope everybody listening hasn't fallen into that trap, but it's important to put people right if they have, because that's not going to happen. So if you sort of tune into the detail of the COP just in November next year and you discover that there's not a big new negotiated international treaty, you're going to be disappointed. But I can tell you that now. So really, the COP is about three things. First of all, there is a multilateral element to the COP. It's really important. It's about 190 plus countries finalizing the negotiation on some of the detailed rules of the Paris Agreement, which was agreed 5 years ago. and that includes stuff around transparency, right? Something very, at the level of nation states. It includes stuff about carbon markets. It includes making sure that promises that were made in the past are being kept in terms of finance flows from the developed world to the developing world. That's the real sort of nitty-gritty negotiated business of the COP. The other really big thing, which doesn't actually happen at the COP, which is happening right now and will happen for the 14 months between now and the COP, is governments stepping up and delivering on their Paris Agreement promise to ratchet their plans. You heard yesterday, China just announced that they are going to do that. That's a really big deal. China just announced that they will commit to net zero before 2060. Preliminary analysis says that that commitment alone takes up to 0.3 degrees off global warming trajectory by the end of the century. That's a really big deal. Of course, the UK is committed to net zero 2050. Hope to see their NDC when the government's got enough bandwidth to announce it, and the EU also making great progress. And many other countries have committed, many of them small, but still members of the multilateral community. That's really important. And then the bit that I'm working on with many partners all around the world, it really is a big collaboration exercise. I would be collapsing if I was trying to do this without collaborating. Is mobilizing or encouraging, because there's so many already mobilizing, the private sector all along the value chains, all around the world, small and large, manufacturing, services, and crucially the investment and finance sector, but also local government. Remember, the state of California is the 5th biggest economy in the world, but doesn't have a seat in the UNFCCC. Major cities like London, Paris, Lagos, Mumbai have a huge influence in the direction of economies. So it's really the sum of how well the negotiations are managed and land, the ratcheting of national ambition, and the momentum from everybody else that will dictate whether we collectively, the world, decides that Glasgow has been a success or not. And it really matters because it is the first test of the Paris Agreement. I think that you can't talk about that now without the context of COVID, right? Because it's just changed everything. And I think that the crucial point that Lois makes about collaboration that I'm starting to see as being perhaps one of the most crucial elements of the geopolitics around the economic recovery and climate change is whether or not that recovery is a collaborative global recovery, which will require something like the Prince of Wales referred to in his opening remarks at Climate Week, a Marshall Plan for people and planet. We can't just have Green New Deals in the developed world and then 200 million people falling back into extreme poverty in the rest of the world. That won't lead to success at the COP. So that's a very new element. Like, how do we actually manage that? And we know there are very good arguments for 3 times as many jobs created investing in the green economy than the brown economy, and rapid job creation and things like building retrofits. So we kind of know the arguments there, but that's going to be really important. So to disclosure, I joined CDP in 2007, so I'm like, I have all the tattoos for being a passionate believer in disclosure and that transparency done right. And this is where I think all the technical work that you've been discussing is one of the biggest levers for systemic change. Right, the sunshine treatment, as it's sometimes called, really, really does matter. And so there's no doubt that Mark Carney's personal leadership, and it's great to see him working with the UN and with the UK government, and I get to work with him and his team on this, have raised the issue. I think a few things I want to say about this. I don't think there's any doubt that this is going to go mandatory. I mean, you've seen the UK government already consulting on occupational pension schemes. And so my kind of number one advice to anybody thinking about this is start, because it's complicated and you need a few years to learn how to do it well. And the first year you will probably fudge it a bit, and there'll be some bits that you're not happy with. I mean, that's always been the case with disclosure, but the bar is raising as people get more sophisticated. So if you're even on the webinar and you haven't started, then just commit to starting now. Even if you do it quietly in your own backyard without sharing it with anybody, but share it with do it seriously at board level and share it until you're confident enough to share it with investors, because you're going to have to. We've got nearly $5 trillion of assets under management in the Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance committing to net zero. And they're not going to be investing in companies who don't know what the transition to net zero means to them. So all the signals are coming, both in terms of regulation and in terms of the market. I think that the other thing that I'm personally keenest on is that the scenario work really becomes much higher quality. I mean, I've seen a lot of, to put it frank, some warming, lots of warming type scenarios, like a 2-degree world, a 4-degree world. Oh, lots of flooding, disastrous flooding, really bad and catastrophic. That's not really going to help decision making. I think for me, much more important is the trajectory of the transition. Like, we now know that we're going to go to zero. It's like the science is just getting worse every time the scientists look at it. The scientists are starting to get scared. We'll have more IPCC reports next year before the COP. I think that will be a jolt to markets. I think it will jolt the kids to go back on the streets if they haven't got back. And I think it will be a jolt to markets as the scientists say. And I often think of this. I've shared this with some of you. From the risk and audit and risk committee, we think of risks on 2 dimensions, right? Likelihood and impact. So it's a given that because we haven't had the right policy response, the likelihood of getting to 1.5 degrees has gone up every time the IPCC have looked at it. So it's gone from the left-hand side to the right-hand side on the x-axis. But every time the IPCC look at that same risk of 1.5 degree rise, the impact goes up. So it's not just going from left to right in terms of being more and more likely, it's going from bottom to top. So it's a total failure of global risk management. And so particularly for investors who are invested in the whole global economy, they're sitting on top of that total failure of risk management. And the real issue is that how are we going to correct? Is it going to be linear, like a nice, smooth, managed descent? I hope so, because there'll be human and economic damage in a shock trajectory. But you'll know the work that the PRI have done, the inevitable policy response, modelling what a kind of panic policy response will be if it's kind of like don't do anything, like, and then oh shit, we need to act, and then we have stranded assets, and we have stranded communities, and we have political pushback which may delay them. So I think for me the most important thing I'd like to see is much more sophisticated scenarios which look at the risks of discontinuous change, because that's the worst case for most economic actors. Thanks, Mardi. Oh, last thing I've got to say, because it's my job, is everyone's got to join the race to zero. We've had well over 1,000 companies doing that. I mentioned the Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance. I'm sure there'll be a asset managers and a banks equivalent initiative in the next few months. But everybody should just make sure their commitment to net zero is very clear to their employees, their customers, and their policymakers. Thank you.
No, that's great. Thank you, Nigel. And we'll make sure that we tag Race to Zero and continue to push Race to Zero in all of my call to actions for this year. I started 2020 saying this year has to be the year for action. I'm sick of talking. I can't do this anymore. And now I have to do 2 years of talking, trying to get us to COP26 and mandatory TCFD. So still action, if everything has to end with action, which is why we'll come on to Gemma shortly, because she's going to give us all a few actions to take away and do. Firstly, I've got a couple more questions. We have one here around New Zealand moving to mandatory TCFD, sort of a who's next, who's coming along the line. Mara, do you want to touch on that quickly?
I can't break anyone else's news, but we were pleased to see New Zealand taking steps on this, and I think that it continues to set a precedent that other countries have been working on as well. Of course, the UK, EU, the ones I mentioned, but a really big announcement out of New Zealand. We're in talks to have another national government supporter or two in the next few weeks, so stay tuned on that. But I can't.
Well, I tried.
Anybody else's news.
And I think what's really important though is like Nigel said, the writing is on the wall. This is moving to mandatory. It is going in some of the biggest markets in the world, and it's going fast. And it's not just being regulated. The enforcement is coming in behind hard on this. So, like Nigel said, get started. We have one more question here that I had come through, which I think is also for Mara. If I find my piece of paper, it came in by email, and it's regarding the TCFD and the TCAF, which is the new carbon accounting standards being developed and agreed around Scope 3 and financial information. How is there a connection between the two? One of our listeners is asking.
So that is something that we want to explore as part of our further work on metrics. We've definitely seen PCAF gaining momentum as well this year, and a lot of support from different financial institutions. And that's something that we take very seriously and that we want to make note of. And we want to make sure that there is a connection, if it's appropriate for the TCFD. So we're looking at it right now. And they're very encouraged to see more of a standard around, Scope 3 and finance.
Thanks, Mara.
emissions.
That's really helpful. We have another question here, but I think this is actually could be for me, not for any of the panelists. So I feel this is kind of a cheeky one to pull this up. So Lois, if you want to back me up in behind, so I don't feel like I'm answering my own questions here. What does the future hold for CDSB and the TCFD based on the recent announcement of major reporting frameworks aligning? Will this become a culling of specialized groups driving one framework? Will it all become one organization, or will it be something else? What's the future of TCFD? I'll take that first, if you like, Mara, and Lois, and Mara, if you'd like to come in behind. I'm good with backup. So this, you would have seen that the statement of intent for the largest 5 global reporting frameworks and standards published a model for what a global corporate reporting system could look like nearly 2 weeks ago. And that is a significant step forward in us thinking about how we all work together, how our frameworks fit together and can constructively be used together to report information to relevant stakeholders as required. Now, the TCFD, and Mara won't mind me saying this, was built off those 5 frameworks. So it's very much embedded across every single one of them, whether that be CDSB's principles and requirements, SASB's metrics and targets, some of CDP's scenarios and data. It's all there. It all comes across all of them. So in many ways, TCFD is already built amongst and within all of what's going on out there. So actually, if you're already doing all of those really, really well, you'd already be doing TCFD, right? You could probably be cheeky enough to say that. So what will become? I think this is very much a watch this space. There'll be another announcement in mid-November, further work that's being done, further steps that are being taken. I'm probably safe to say I wouldn't hold out for one organization. I don't think that would make sense. But there certainly are key groupings within that paper that you read. That very happy to read between the lines. But we do see a really clear group of organizations that are about financial materiality and enterprise value creation. We do see clear roles for data platforms, data providers, and technology, and we do see clear roles for reporting to wider stakeholders. So I might just leave it there unless Lois or Mara want to add some more color. No? Right, so before we head to some more questions, I'm going to ask Gemma if you can quickly, I'm going to hand to you anyway, Gemma. Gemma leads and powers the TCFD Knowledge Hub at CDSB. So everything that's developed on TCFD comes through her filter. Gemma also spends a lot of time building with experts from around the world the e-learning courses that are freely available on the TCFD Knowledge Hub. They're about 45-minute to 2-hour accredited CPD courses. They're entry level to get you into this space, whether that be on risk, on TCFD, on governance. There's a whole suite there. So I urge you to go on and have a look. So Gemma is the lady behind this. So Gemma, over to you. How do we take action to go forward?
Thanks, Mardi. And hello to everyone online. I'm glad to be speaking to you today. And as we've heard today, there's a lot going on, and we're seeing more and more organisations not only supporting but reporting against the TCFD recommendations, but more needs to be done in terms of the quality and the quantity of disclosure. As Lois mentioned, even some of the largest companies are finding some challenges and some of the complexities around climate disclosure. But the good news is that there are lots of resources out there to help you. And as Mardi just said, part of my role at CDSB, I manage the TCFD Knowledge Hub, and I am fortunate enough to be able to see all of the fantastic work that's going on from a huge range of organisations who are driving this forward and really trying to look at the technical issues and iron those out. And what I want to do today is just kind of give you a flavour of some of those resources and some places where you can go if you're getting started, to get you started, or if you're already on the journey, places where you can go to improve your reporting. So if you haven't been on the TCFD Knowledge Hub, here is the home screen, We have a number of pages that break down the TCFD recommendations individually. We also have a page on scenario analysis. We have some case studies from companies who have been willing to share some of their insights into some of the challenges that they face and how they overcame those challenges. And we have an events page where you can go and have a look at community events and webinars that are going on throughout the year. We also have a resource database, and this resource database has about 580 resources on there at the moment, including tools, guidance, research, insights, methodologies, the list goes on. And every month we receive more and more of these resources. So the hub is designed to be a central repository to help you search and filter and find the resources that are most helpful to you. Now, on the next slide, I'm just going to give you a flavour of that. I'm going to cherry pick a handful of resources that have come out recently that I think are particularly helpful. And starting with CDSB, we've been working on with a number of organisations, just as Mardi said, kind of demonstrating how you can use CDSB, SASB, CDP in order to fulfil the TCFD recommendations, or at least get started and draw upon what you're already doing. There are also some sector-specific guides out there. So the next resources I'm going to show you, as Lois went through all of the fantastic work that WBCSD are doing on the preparer forums, they've also got additional work around assurance and some accounting work that's really fantastic. But the UNFCCC have also been doing some pilot studies looking at the banking sector, insurance sector, and investors, and there's a whole range of resources that have come out of those pilots that are particularly useful. There are also some resources that are specific to jurisdictions. So the next resources, just give you a few there. So we've got the CFRF, which was a forum put together by the UK regulatory body, the PRA and the FCA. And very recently, only a few months ago, they came out with a suite of guidance to help financial institutions on disclosing and integrating this into their practice. In Japan, the TCFD consortium have been diligently putting together loads of resources, and I've highlighted there one of my favorite ones, which focuses on how to use the information. So it's not just on how to prepare it, but how users may then use that information. We also see some great work coming out of the EU and Australia, South Africa, Brazil. There's some great work, and Canada in particular as well. And lastly but not least, there are some resources that are really focused and targeted to specific professionals. So the Prince's Accounting for Sustainability, A4S, have a set of guidance for finance teams and CFOs. The GARP Risk Institute has some guidance documents, but also a certification for risk professionals. Lois mentioned earlier as well, WBCSD have got a resource for a guide with COSO, looking specifically how to integrate climate change or sustainability more broadly into risk management processes. And last year, the World WBCSD, WEF, in collaboration with PwC, produced the principles for effective climate governance, and that's really targeted at boards, because we have to have top-down and bottom-up approach when it comes to this. So if you're struggling to kind of get your boards engaged on this, that resource in particular is really helpful and gives you some questions to go and ask to your senior leadership. Next slide, please. And I do want to mention that those are really just me cherry picking a handful. As I said, there are over 500 resources on the hub. So do go on there, filter and search for the ones that are most specific to you. And then I just want to touch upon, as Mardi said, we've heard throughout the years that there needs to be more education and more capacity building in this field. And so what we created last year was some courses on the TCFD Knowledge Hub. We've released 6 over the last year, and we have more coming in the next few months and years. They start from a 101 of climate disclosure more broadly, a specific course on TCFD, and then we go into a bit more detail on some of the topics, specific topics like governance, risk management, and we have a course specifically for accountants. So we encourage you to join the thousands of people who have already registered, and get yourself on there. You do get a nifty certificate to demonstrate that you have completed these courses, and it's just a way to kind of make sure that everybody in your organization has a foundational understanding of where we're going and what it is that we're expecting people to do. Next slide. So I'm just going to finish here, and I'm sure Mardi is also going to touch on some of these things too. But, as everyone said on this course, as Nigel said, just get started. It's mandatory TCFD is coming. So if you're not already engaged, get involved. Sign up to the TCFD Knowledge Hub newsletter, which comes out every month and talks and demonstrates some of the new resources that are coming out. Keep your eye on London Climate Action Week, which will be later this year. There are going to be some fantastic resources, and we know the TCFD guidance documents will probably be out around there or just before then. And get in contact with us at CDSB. We want to continue building this database of knowledge to make sure that everybody is on the same path, that we're learning from each other, and that we're all moving in the right direction.
Thanks, Gemma. I guess that answers all the questions I get asked. What does it look like? How do I do it? And where do I get my data from? I mean, on a daily basis, I get every single one of those. So have a look at those. And I do urge you to sign up to the TCFD Hub newsletter, because it does literally drop the best and the newest into your inbox once a month for you to have a quick scan over, see if they're relevant, and move on from there. So I have a few more. There's a few more questions that came through, which I think we'll get back to you offline, because I do want to pose one final question for our panelists as we quickly approach the hour. So a bit of a quick fire round for Gemma, Mara, Nigel, and Lois. Okay, so if you could have one outcome by COP26 Glasgow next year, what would that be? Who would like to go first? And Mara, she's smiling.
Well, that's an easy one.
Is it got to be to do with TCFD, or can we go broader?
Well, I have to focus on TCFD, and that's a very easy answer for us. I think Mark Carney would agree. Climate integrated into every financial decision that is made based on a wealth of climate-related information in the market.
Brilliant. Nigel?
China, the EU, and the USA agree to phase out combustion engines by 2030 for cars and 2040 for trucks.
Very specific. I like that a lot. Lois?
It's really hard to sum up. I mean, I think that there are the sorts of things that Mara and Nigel have talked about. Of course, I agree, but I think that I heard an engineer once say that in addition to what we can achieve with engineering, we need an evolution of consciousness, and I hope we can have a kind of a philosophical think about what we want to achieve as well as the practical.
I love it, Lois. A holistic answer that draws together Nigel and Mara. Now, Gemma.
Mardi, can I just put my TCFD spin on what I wished for? You might have noticed that the UK is consulting right now on how fast forward to bring for the combustion engine ban, and Shell came out with a public position to say that they supported that being in 2030. That's a company lobbying a government to shut its market down faster than it might otherwise happen. Why is that? It's because of the risk of the uncertainty. It's exactly what I was talking about. They know it's going to happen, but at the moment they're having to gamble in uncertainty. Will it be 2030? Will it be 2040? So certainty is really valuable.
That's really helpful addition, Nigel. I completely agree. In 2030, wow, that's quicker than. It feels like that'll be next year, doesn't it? Gemma.
We're seeing a huge amount of commitment from companies, especially when we're reading annual reports. We're seeing a lot of people committing to report against TCFD. We're seeing a lot of commitments on a range of things. And I'd like to start seeing that commitment move to action. So we're seeing the actual tangible things that are happening. That would be great.
Move to action. Stop the tick box saying that Poor Gemma spends a lot of time reading corporate reports in the CDSB Secretariat. So Gemma's very good at looking at tick box activity and going, oh, another tick box. And really what Gemma wants to do is run across the airwaves and go, oh my God, I found one. So please, everyone, as Gemma sets out to read the next 100 or 200 corporate reports, please give her that I found one moment, because that really will demonstrate that we are taking this from talk and hype and commitment, but right through to the action that's absolutely desperately needed if we are going to meet some of these really ambitious targets and pave the way nicely to get us to Glasgow next year. So we're coming up to the hour, so I'm going to say thank you to my panelists today for joining me and providing such a great update on where we're at with TCFD and COP26 and the road ahead and corporate reporting. You're a great bunch, so I'm delighted to have you all here today. We had a really great panel yesterday. Some people have asked risk-related questions in the sidebar. We had Robert Litterman and the Global Association of Risk Management Professionals and Rodney Owen yesterday talking about risk. Sustainability should not be a department, it's a strategy. Some really good, we had the hashtag Rodney Owen trending all over the waves. This is really about, shaking this thing up. CDSB is running webinars on almost 1 to 2 a week going forward, really designed to get as many people as we can into the conversation, get them learning and get them sharing and get them moving forward. So they're regularly advertised. Sign up to our newsletter, check our website, look on the back of this recording. And when you're finished today, make sure you do send the link on to somebody else just so they can have a listen too. So we had 1,000 people after yesterday. So 1,000 people shared it overnight. So I want to double that or triple that with this fantastic panel I've got here today. So enough from me. Thank you again, speakers. Have a lovely afternoon and evening, everyone that's joined us. And I look forward to you joining us again soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mardi. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Mardi.